And today we are joined by several census representatives. We have Julius Maina rather, Robin Brown, and Noel Isama, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Robin Brown. I am a partnership specialist for the state of Maryland. I'm really excited to be here and to explore and let you guys know different options that we have to do with the census. So I'm super excited. Thank you so much for the invite.
Awesome. Well.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noel Isama. I'm a program analyst for the Community Partnership and Engagement Program at the Census headquarters. I'm really happy to be here. My mom's a teacher, and so I was telling somebody this week about what she used to do to us during the summers, which is essentially dump us in the libraries, but that was probably the best thing that she could have done for us. And so I'm really happy to be here, and thanks to Anna and all the organizers, and go Terps.
Awesome. And Julius. Julius, are you with us?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I was having issues with the unmute. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, greetings from the Census Bureau. This is Julius Maina. I'm the partnership coordinator for the state of Maryland. Just quick background, Maryland is part of the Philadelphia region. So 9 states, Philadelphia region, Maryland is part of it. So greetings from our regional director, Fernando Armstrong, as well. Happy to be here.
Awesome, and we're delighted to be hearing from you guys in just a little bit. And my name is Ndumu. I'm an assistant professor at the UMD, tongue twister, College Park iSchool in the LIS program. And today's session really is a response to continued marginalization and inequity among Black communities. So we really want to mobilize, as librarians and library professionals, we want to mobilize our communities in order to engage in civic action in this very important moment. As we know, our communities have been dealt with the double blows of COVID-19, as well as continued racist murders. And in order to advocate for increase in equity, representation, and resources, population data and accurate population data is so important to that endeavor. So this is, as I mentioned, the first webinar in a string of webinars where we will be talking about how to really advocate for Black communities. And so before I jump into all of the resources and allow our colleagues to speak, I'd like to play a video.
Libraries are dependent on federal funding, and this is why the 2020 census is so important. I'm a librarian. I oversee the 4 branches in Santa Monica, and I'm a division manager. Libraries are more than books. They offer safe spaces, they offer technology, they offer services in any type of literacy, financial literacy, health literacy, digital literacy. We're just gonna meet you where you are. The 2020 census is important because it's a way to understand who we are. It has so much information about your area, your city, your state. Everyone should respond to the census. College students, seniors, people experiencing homelessness, you still need to be counted. We can use those numbers to show the need of the library. In today's world, the community trusts libraries because we are lighthouses. We provide light. I want to make sure libraries are available for everyone.
Awesome. So there are a number of resources that ALA has provided and that BCALA has been encouraging members to use. And you can find these resources at ala.org/census. They have compiled, and this is the Census 2020 Task Force at ALA, has compiled a host of different resources for you to stay abreast on the latest actions and activities and operations which have changed post coronavirus. You can sign up for a newsletter as well at the top right. And there are several different fact sheets on the extent to which libraries can help and privacy issues, as well as digital information. And so I encourage you to download those at that website. We will also be providing access to this presentation in the chat box, and all registrants will receive a copy of this presentation. And the key resources that we want to boost, as I mentioned, ALA has compiled lots of resources, but the three main guides are responding to the 2020 census and programming and outreach and partnership, and also the latest guide, which is Library's Guide to the 2020 Census. And there are a lot of frequently asked questions and how-tos and ready-to-use resources that libraries don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are very easy to apply to your local setting, so you can just rinse and repeat it. And again, the website is ala.org/census. In addition, I wanted to point you to this mapping tool, which is a census tool that allows community members and community leaders, such as librarians, to know the hard to count communities in your region. And our census partners will describe what hard to count communities are comprised of. These are several different buckets, if you will. So many types of communities that have been difficult to include or get their participation in the census consistently across the decades. These groups have been hard to count. So they'll share a little bit more about that, but this resource allows you to zoom into a 5-mile radius of a public library and know who exactly is in your community and how you can reach them. In addition, I wanted to highlight some models that have been used and have been successful within libraries. Our very own, BCALA's very own Kelvin Watson, who's a past president, has been doing a great job down at the Broward County Public Library System in Florida. And they have been including census experts in their programming. They have hosted programming. They have held tables at community forums, encouraged community members to apply for census jobs. They've worked very closely with their local complete count committees as well. So we'll be talking about ways that you can mobilize your community as well. And I wanted to highlight another model. This is the Counted In project, which is specifically geared toward immigrant communities. And this is any immigrant community across the nation. And it's designed to help you promote census outreach to immigrants through library services. And so for those of you who work with Black diasporic immigrants, whether they are African, Afro-Caribbean, or Afro-Latinx, this is a tool that allows you to download customizable free resources to help you market in several different languages as well. And there's also ready-to-use resources from the census to marketing materials. And this has all been distilled for librarians to use. And lastly, I wanted to point out related webinars. There was a Census Outreach to Communities of Color webinar, which you can play back at any time. It's freely accessible. And there will also be another webinar on July 8th. And this is through ALA's ODLOS, I believe, and the Census Task Force. And so you can join them for a last chance for a complete count webinar, and you can register there. As I mentioned, this presentation will be available for everyone. And without further ado, I'll now turn it over to our colleagues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ndumu. And once again, we're really excited to have this conversation with BCALA. We learned a couple of things from the 2010 census, one of which is we need to reconsider who our true partners are. And we need to really confront the idea of government as a trusted voice. Believe it or not, government is not, based on data, the most trusted voice. And we knew that in 2010. We also knew that we had to change some things in how we do our response rate in hard to count communities. And that looks like children under 5, which is the highest undercounted population, non-English speaking populations, immigrants, senior populations, college students, and any other transitioning population. So coming to 2020, we did a couple exciting things that I want to highlight, just because it's important to know where we are in 2020, pre-COVID, right? So this was the idea before COVID. The first thing we decided to do is we did the Luca project, which is where in every jurisdiction, a county tells us where we count people, right? The 2020 census, or the census in general, is a head count per household, meaning we want to get an accurate count of every single person in the United States, because it's constitutionally mandated. Secondly, that count determines about $675 billion allocated to communities, and that's things for schools, roads, libraries, services. So all those things that we know and we use daily are determined based on the 2020 census. What we found out, most people do not have a true understanding how important the census is, but mainly because of the messenger. So we realized we have to lean on our trusted voices in 2020 to truly get everybody counted. So we're actually really excited. Part of our campaign, we established where to count, motivate people to respond. And so we're still in the motivation phase, right? And that's the education where, why is it important? Is it easy? Is it safe? And then we count the population. For the first time ever, we went online. So believe it or not, we have never gone online with the census, and for the first time ever, we did that. So this time around, people have 3 ways to complete it, and that's online, via phone, because we understand broadband is an issue, and finally via paper mailing for those constitutional purists like myself who like the paper and the pen. And then finally, the plan was to release the results by December 31st on the president's desk. And for the record, the Census Bureau is apolitical and nonpartisan, and that's an important fact to remember. Next slide, please. And so we did some things because we are a data-driven agency. We considered, what does 2020 look like, right? We knew mobile population, information explosion, distrust for government. These were all the things that we had to confront, right? These were the threats. If you were to do a SWOT analysis of the 2020 census, this is what it looked like. And this was pre-COVID. Next slide, please. So we came in and we thought nothing could possibly go wrong. We did a SWOT analysis. We surveyed populations. We actually did an additional survey called the Census Barriers, Attitudes, Motivation Survey, where we went to the communities that were lowest responding in 2010. We said, what is the reason why you don't want to respond, and how can we get there with you? And as you can see, we had to adjust the SWOT analysis to include certain things, digital divide, because for the first segment of the census this time around, from March to right now, everybody went online, but we had to consider a digital divide. We can't say, yay, we were prepared because we went online because a digital divide was a thing. COVID-19 happened, and a lot of our outreach was, we want to be out in the community. We want people to see us, know us. We hired locally, right? So for this time around, the people in the community did the outreach, but in the absence of being able to do outreach, we really had to reconsider it all. So we had to go back to the basics, which is, why is it important? Is it easy? And is it safe? And I can tell you the citizenship question, which was the biggest thing that we dealt with, is not on this form. So that is the first thing. The second thing is, based on Title 13, your information, if you fill out this form, and you should because it's money attached to it, will now be shared with the IRS, FBI, CIA, or housing authorities. And I go there because although the data is important, it's equally important to attach it to what matters to people. And for right now, people are worried about jobs, education, schooling. And so we had to change our outreach. We had to say, hey, consider a scenario in which in 2010, in your community, we only counted 60% of the population, right? You go to census.gov, ROAM, which is our random outreach access mapper, and it tells you what the predicted low response score in your community is, right? Imagine we only counted 60%, and let's say there's this random COVID epidemic that breaks out, and we only have vaccines deployed for 60% of your population. What could happen to your community? And that's how we have to start making it plain, starting to make sense. And so on this presentation, we're going to share interesting ways to truly hone in on what that looks like, right? I'm a former educator myself, taught at Morgan State University, shout out to the HBCUs. And I used to always say, if you do not make it targeted and plain, then the message is going to be lost, right? So part of this presentation, you'll now hear from my colleague who will talk to you about what we did in terms of ensuring people know right now what the count is in your community, so you can target it. So if you're a library out there and you're saying, I want to know in my community what the response rate is. I want to know how well we're doing, right? I want to know where we still need to target. There's a tool for that, and Robin Brown will touch on that. And then I'll have my colleague look at almost like a design think approach in which you can actually talk to any of your community members and you can say, hey, if this is a concern, these are the personas, this is how we target down to the census tract, because it's important that people get counted, right? With $675 billion on the line, it is literally dollars and cents. And it's important for us to come to our census, especially because we know COVID-19 disproportionately impacted specific communities. The reason why that's the case, the infrastructure was lacking based on the funding that they got. So if you just look at response rates in the hardest to hit communities, they most likely were not properly counted in 2010. And our goal here is to enact everybody to be a trusted voice, to be a messenger, to be an ambassador, and say, hey, data is your friend. This Census 2020 is safe, it's easy, and this is something you can trust because it matters to your community. And that's the goal with this presentation. And we hope every librarian listening will be charged up to say, you know what, after this presentation, this is what I could do. So with that, Robin Brown, next slide, please. Oh, I do have one more slide, sorry. So this was the original timeline that's in the blue. We had the initial infield address canvassing where we went around and just verified the addresses were accurate. The group quarters is the most interesting because our colleges were hit in a very interesting way. Before we counted colleges, it was a really simple thing, e-response form. They just said in the dorm rooms, because it's a facility, this is where they're counted. And then the off-campus residents, we knew where they were. But all that changed because of COVID-19. So we've had to update. The first time we extended the deadline because we realized colleges might be getting shut down. And then they did get shut down. So now the concern and our guideline as it stands is we have to make sure that we're counting people where they would have been if COVID did not happen, because it's important for those communities, the college towns, to get that money. Census Day was April 1st. I know it's a joke. It's April Fool's Day, but it's not a joke to us. It's my joke of the day. And finally, our internet self-response was originally March 2020 to July 20th. Now you have until October 31st to complete the form, meaning although there's a big window, we still want people to count, but we expanded that because we realized, you know, a lot of things changed, and census is deeply important, but there's other equally important things. And finally, non-response follow-up is August 20th to October 2020, and that's when the door knockers come to your community and say, hey, we noticed you did not fill it out online, over the phone, or submit the paper form, and we're here to encourage you to respond. And I can tell you, the biggest outreach campaign for me has been like, if you do not want somebody to come knocking on your door, go online. And that's been working really well. So with that, next slide, and Robin Brown, please.
Thank you so much, Julius, for the earlier part of the presentation. You explained a lot, and I hope that all the librarians who are on the Zoom call just know how important it is, and the information that was given was something you could tell your friends, something you could tell the patrons. I know some of you all have libraries that may be opening up soon, whether it be via drop off or however, you know, carpool line or whatever the situation is. What an opportunity for you all to be so much more understanding of why it's important, but also giving back even more to your community than you already have. So I just wanted to point that out. What I am going to do right now, however, is I'm going to leave a website in the chat for everyone so that you all, oh, Julius has already done it for me. Thanks, Julius. So what he's done is he's actually left a website that it could be interactive during this phone call. It's perfectly fine, or this Zoom call. But this is our website where we essentially educate individuals on the response rates, right? So a lot of people are like, well, how do I know where we are versus 2010? Or how do I know if my community has been filling out the census? This tool has been absolutely amazing. So the first time in history, as Julius stated, was the first time anyone was able to complete their census online. And because of COVID, a lot of people actually did complete their census online. So depending on which state that you pick, you're able to essentially just say, hey, I can select my state, I can select the city, I can select the county, I could even select the congressional district. Which is really, really good. So I live in the state of Maryland, and so typically I like to see how Maryland's doing. But you can choose whatever state that you want. When it comes to the drop-down boxes on the right, it has a selection where you can kind of select the date. And usually by a partner of mine actually told us by 3 p.m. they're updated to the day. But typically I tell people, give it about 24 hours to get real time in. So right now you'll see the day before. I do want to highlight something when you originally see the map on the website. So the slide that is being shown right now, you're going to see a lot of blue and a lot of light blues and a lot of different colors. This is definitely a way for you to kind of see where your state is at, where your community is at. The darker the color, the more in the communities that you all live in have responded. So for example, again, like I said, because I live in the state of Maryland, even though Maryland could be 70%, I'm just throwing a number up there, right? It could be a number, but maybe my particular community that I live in is only 60%. I want to be able to say, okay, what can I do? Where can I go? How can I communicate to my communities to know that the census is important? You can go to the next slide, please. Oh, well, there you go. So right here on the side where you see Maryland response rates as of 6:30, so as of yesterday, we do have the ability to know exactly where. And so again, on this slide, you're able to see the darker areas. You're able to see which areas have been responding, which areas haven't been responding as much as they could. It's a couple of things. I don't want people to think it's only because people just don't want to respond, right? We found out just as being a partnership specialist, we found out in working with a lot of congressional districts in the state of Maryland was that there are some areas that have broadband, that don't have broadband capabilities, right? So this is something that is a hurdle. However, there are other ways that individuals can actually respond to the census. Of course, we said the first thing was online, right? The second thing is by mail. A lot of individuals will be receiving a mailer that says, hey, if you don't want to do it online, you can still fill out the census in the mail. Now, we know that a lot of people probably don't want to fill out the census through the mail or online. The beauty of it is that we have the opportunity to be able to give them a phone number where they can actually call. And we also understand that, and I'll give an example for myself. I'm first generation American. My family is from a Afro-Caribbean, which is in the country of Haiti. And I remember growing up, my parents did not know how to necessarily read in Creole, but they knew how to speak it, right? And so this is an opportunity where maybe there are individuals who might get a mailer in, but don't necessarily know how to read their native language. That's fine. We have up to 13 languages. People on the phone who can actually assist and direct individuals on how to complete their census. And so that's something that I wanted to make sure that I pointed out, because there's so many ways that you, as pillars of the communities, as librarians, because you guys meet people from all different walks of life, all different types of communities. And so these are different opportunities that you could present to them in the event that somebody wants to fill out their census. You can go to the next slide, please. So motivation meets education, 50 ways census data is being used. So you're gonna get people who are gonna be skeptics, right? Why does the government need to know my information? Why do they need to know who I have, what I do, what happens, right? Again, I always like giving people personal stories, because I think people are able to relate to you a little bit more. And because you guys are trusted voices in the community, they're going to believe what you say. I have 2 children in the public school community. And so I have a upcoming 6th grader and I have an upcoming 7th grader. And I remember when my youngest was in 4th grade, and as a 4th grader, he had 36 students to one teacher. I also was a former educator. I taught 1st grade and I had 17 students. And I think a lot of it had to do with the numbers, not understanding exactly how many people were actually going to be occupying the community, occupying the schools. So when you don't have an accurate count, there's certain decisions that are going to be made based on the numbers that are given. You know, for example, drawing school district boundaries, right? We all want our schools to go, we all want our kids to go to great, equitable, educational, equitable schools. And sometimes boundaries are set where, you know, there's a new school that happens, kids have to be bused over here instead of over here. Another example too, we're in a pandemic, right? And so like Julius had stated before, there's so many opportunities where people had no idea that obviously this was going to happen. They had no idea how many vaccines they may have needed or how many hospital beds that they needed, how many people were actually in the community, how many women were pregnant during this time, and were going to be delivering babies at the same time of the pandemic. So I think a lot of uncertainty has a lot to do with in preparation, right? And so the census allows people for the next 10 years to be in full preparation. The last thing that I do want to point out is, you know, being able to make business decisions, right? And so as librarians, I know you guys are aware of the communities that vote to make sure a library is in, whether it gets renovated, all those type of decisions are made. Where I live in particular, I remember when people were begging for a new library to be more on our side of the town because we didn't want to drive to the other side of the town. And so it's decisions like this, the census weighs heavily on. And so planning for this is very important, and also educating the patrons, hey, have you done your census? Other ways that that you all, and I know Noel is going to get into it, but other ways that people have assisted as far as librarians, they've opened up their libraries and maybe had one designated computer for, or maybe a row of designated computers that allows individuals to complete their census. You can go to the next slide, please. So I think this part, we're going to go ahead and add Noel to this. He's going to do an awesome activity that I think is going to be beneficial for this group, of course, and be also motivational, because we had fun with this even when we all were planning this. So we're super grateful, and I thank you so much for taking the time. Noel?
Great. Thank you very much, Robin. And thanks everyone again for joining us this afternoon. So what we're going to do right now is go through a very condensed version of what we call a Census Solutions workshop. And in fact, we've even updated it a little bit more to just call it a Census Solutions sort of approach to how we do these things. And I think you all as librarians are perfectly situated to take this approach to your communities and then act upon it. And the whole objective here, before we even, and just keep this in mind as we're going through this, is to develop quick and actionable ideas, because as Julius and Robin mentioned, is we don't really have that much time in many ways. So we need all the ideas, we need to implement all the ideas we can to make sure that our communities get out there and fill out the census and make sure that they're counted. So the objectives of a Census Solutions workshop or Census Solutions activity is to, one, build connections and figure out who in your community you can work with to raise awareness about the census and get folks to make sure that they complete it. Developing actionable concepts, so actionable being the key word here, making sure that you come up with ideas that you can actually act upon and act upon quickly. The other thing is to sort of connect all these ideas together to really build momentum, and so create sort of movement on the ground, much like we're seeing throughout the country, particularly though counting the census. And it'll be great to sort of tie the census to a lot of what's going on and what you're observing in communities right now. And then the other thing is, particularly with this activity, is taking this and actually implementing it and doing it in your community. Everything that we're really talking about here is something that you can do on your own. And we actually encourage you to do so and actually maybe adapt it for your own ends and adapt it to your own situations as well. So next slide, please. Great. So one of the big things as librarians is that you guys play a very key role in your communities. And so I really wanted you to think about where you are. Some of you all, as I've learned in my experiences, my previous job, but also here, is that you actually in many ways sort of nexus and centus and locus of your communities in terms of people getting information, getting services. And so you actually do play a unique role in being able to coordinate, collaborate, and convene people. Also, your librarians actually tend to be very, I know working in state politics before, librarians can be very, very good advocates for resources and pointing people to the needs of community. But also, you've also played a tremendous role because in many ways you are educators as well. So you can educate, motivate, and mobilize your communities as well. Next slide, please. So what are we doing here today? So we're going to be actually taking an activity that adapts design thinking. So what the general aim of that is to really put yourself in sort of, to take the term from that world, the user's perspective, and actually create and put yourself in their shoes, understand their problems, and then create a solution that responds to their needs. So this little diagram here sort of kind of goes through the multiple steps of design thinking. Particularly the one word I do really want to emphasize here is, and that you'll hear throughout design literature, is empathy and empathize. And so that's really when you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, try to think from their perspective. And when you do so though, and when you do an activity like this, you really do come away with ideas that actually tend to be more impactful and actually tend to be responsive to their needs. You don't want to be imposing ideas or coming with ideas that are sort of outside, coming from the outside, but you really want to think about things that are relevant to people, particularly the people that you're trying to reach as well. Next slide, please. So great. So as we're doing this activity, and as hopefully as you do it in your communities, some principles that you really want to make sure that you keep, not even just now or even the activities, but maybe in life as well. One is to actually to think for yourself in many ways. So like be expansive in your thinking, but also make sure that when you say parallel is better than serial, is that we don't want to eliminate ideas. In fact, we think of them as parallel, so to speak, not in terms of crossing or canceling each other out. These things aren't mutually exclusive. In many ways, we want to jump on almost all these ideas as much as possible, but particularly as they target certain groups or individuals within our communities. When we do this activity, we emphasize that the magic of time constraint. I think these things are being imposed upon us from all different directions. While that might make us feel pressured in some way, shape, or form, in fact, that actually spurs creativity because it makes you really focus your thinking. And so as you're going along doing this activity, not only now, but in the future, some things to keep in mind is, well, think especially about the resources that you have. I know librarians are people are oftentimes surprised at the capabilities of libraries. I always wish that you guys had more resources. I hope that people will see the importance of libraries in your communities right now. But you guys have access to a lot of resources, to a lot of people, just by the nature of the position that you hold in your communities. And so think about those. And that's something that we really want to emphasize with our partners is think about your existing resources. You don't want to recreate the wheel in many ways, but you actually have a lot of tools at your disposal. As you do these activities, diverge and converge, yes, we're going to, in many ways, we're coming from different directions, and it's actually good to think about our different communities and the unique aspects of it. But at the end of the day, we're coming together for a common purpose here, which is to get folks counted for the census. And then when you're doing this activity, really think about it, have fun, think about the cool ways you can actually get people to come out, particularly for the particular groups that we're going to be, or person or groups that we're thinking of. And in many ways, when you have fun, you actually have more impactful ideas because it really aligns with how people are living and feeling at this moment in time. And in fact, even some of your ideas might help sort of alleviate some of the pressures that we're all going through right now. Next slide, please. So another part of this principles, and so as we go through this, this will be a little bit more clear, is I know you all are very familiar with sort of the general narrative structure, who, what, when, where, and how. And so this activity really focuses on distilling sort of the top three, so to speak. One is who, the personas. So we'll get into what is that a little bit later, but we'll be coming up with personas, so characters that truly reflect individuals within our communities. What, challenge statements, so clarifying the idea of the unique challenges associated with that persona with doing the census or in your communities. And then this activity is really focused on the how. Sort of how do we address the needs of the personas that we're coming up with, the challenges that they face, and thinking about the different ways that we can address that through various activities. activities. And one thing I do want to emphasize here is that the slide deck here, which Anna's going to be providing later, is going to be available. And I kept it, I know we're all in different settings, but what I wanted to do is just like keep it as close to the real thing as possible, because usually we do this in person in a room with a bunch of tables and posters and post-its and things like that. And I wanted to give you guys a visualization of what it looks like doing this. But of course you can adapt it to your needs however you need. And one thing I will offer is you can definitely reach out to us to help you work through ideas. But then the when, of course, the when is now. We definitely need to get started with any ideas that we come up with. So think of it that way. Again, don't use it as a form of pressure, but as a form of motivation and creativity as well. Next slide, please. So other things, as we're thinking about this, as going through the activity, one of the things that as we're starting to ease into the activities that we want people to think about as well is start thinking about what are the top 3 consistent challenges you're facing in advance of the 2020 census. I know COVID sort of even took that to another level, but really thinking about that, because that'll help you focus as you're going through this activity, but also maybe afterwards as well. Another big thing is, again, going back to the resources, what resources, connections, and partnerships do you have at your disposal? Whatever you do, you want to make it easy for yourself, because that makes it easy to implement. And then, as always, visualization is good. So really, what do you want to see from an activity like this? What do you think will be a good outcome in terms of the activities that you have? This can, again, helps clarify the ideas, but also can help you sort of realize the sort of the full extent of the impact of what you're doing. So for example, do you hope that in everyone in your community filling out the census that you will eventually able to expand the library services, or that your community will be able to get the resources that it's been needing to move forward? Those are the things that hopefully we can motivate you as you're moving forward and thinking about ideas that can respond to getting folks to complete the census in your communities as well. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we do in a Census Solutions workshop and in a Census Solutions activity is to come up with a persona. So I'm sure many of you know, but just to go over it quickly, what is a persona? A persona represents the characteristics, demographics, attitudes, behaviors, challenges, and motivators of a group or community. And so in this, next slide, please. In this activity, we actually one of the big things that we spend quite a bit of time on is coming up with a unique character that fits a particular person in your community. In fact, oftentimes what I ask people to do is that when you think of this character, in fact, you actually see this person. You see this person day to day at your work, the people that you interact with your community, and you actually try to think about them in as a detailed a way as possible. In many ways, who's the type of person that you interact in your community that might have a challenge completing the census, or might not, or who you want to make sure that you reach out to the census. And so some of the ways that you can think about them is how they relate to the census. And so the statements in blue oftentimes are some of the things that people reflect back when thinking about the census. So for example, as we mentioned, I don't trust the government with my information. So that's one particular issue that persona might have. And so how do you address that particular concern? How do you make sure that they have enough trust to complete the census? I have trouble completing my census form. So what barriers exist? Do they need someone to help them? Is it an internet issue? Things like that. And then I don't think the census has any impact on my life. Is it a matter of information and educating that particular person, that you see in your community? And then I don't have the time to fill out the census form. So what is it? How can we make sure that you do have enough time, that you do have 10 minutes? Or can we tell you all you need is 10 minutes and you can complete it even on your phone? These are the things that you want to think about when thinking about a persona, when thinking about a distinct character. Obviously, yes, you might have that individual in mind, but that individual might actually represent 10 or 15 or 20 or even 100 many more people. And so that idea of a persona is to really distill that particular individual so that you can target them with your ideas afterwards. So the persona is very important, and we'll keep that in mind as we're doing this as well. Next slide, please. So when you're developing personas, we usually give you like about 10 minutes in this activity to really come up with some details. In fact, like we were saying, we really do actually to dive into this person that you're thinking of, usually within your group. And so we ask you come up with a persona of a person in your community that would need help with the census, or you want to encourage you complete the census. And so we'd ask you for their name, their age, what's the nature of their household? Is it a complex household, as we call it? Do multiple family members moving in? Do they live by themselves? Are they single? What's their level of technology and access and comfort? This is really important, as we've all mentioned, is like some people aren't able to fill out the census because they don't have internet access, or some people are actually hyper tech savvy, but that actually provides a way to engage them in that way too. What's their education? Robin brought up a good example of the language barrier that might exist for some folks, even though that can be overcome as well. The general attitude of the census, and what should be or what is their motivation to participate. So again, we really ask you to dive into thinking about the nature of the person that you're dealing with, the person that you're visualizing in many ways. Next slide, please. So to save everyone time, Robin, Julius, and I came up with a persona for everyone here. Particularly, we wanted to reflect the college-age student that some of you all might encounter from day to day. Again, I'm sure you all can see a little bit of bias here, but Mary Terrapin is 20 years old. She lives off campus, so that makes her situation counting her a little bit more tricky. Sometimes with the census, or oftentimes with the census, we count college students using the group quarters process, where the university provides information to the census about how many people live off campus. Mary's a little bit tricky because she lives off campus, so she really needs to fill out the census so that the people, so that she gets counted for her college town. How would Mary most likely get her info? On the phone. She's a young person, very savvy with technology. She does practically everything on her phone, so that might be the best way to reach her. What's her education? She's currently in school now, so it's about to finish up, I guess. What languages does she have? So she speaks English, but she actually was exposed to Spanish in high school. That's a typical college-age student, is that hopefully they got some sort of language exposure over time. My mom was a French teacher, so I actually always appreciate that as well. And then what's their attitude to the census? So Mary might be apathetic. She thinks her parents will do it for them, or somebody else will do it for them. So mostly because that's just not something she's had to think about before. So how do we make sure that we get the word out to Mary that she completes the census? And what's her motivation to participate? Mary really likes Chipotle. When I went to Maryland a long time ago, it seems, there was only one Chipotle, and that Chipotle every Friday was guaranteed to have a long line on Fridays. I don't know if you all have ever been to College Park and witnessed site, but it's always quite a sight. So what a lot of people don't know, what Mary doesn't know, is that census data is actually used by companies like Chipotle, Starbucks, other large entities to actually locate their locations. And so if the census properly reflects the population of number of people that live in College Park, for example, then College Park might get another Chipotle and hopefully alleviate the one downtown. So next slide, please. So the next thing that you want to think about is the challenge statement. So we figured out the persona, but what is it that's blocking Mary? Or oftentimes we can actually expand it a little bit further to maybe think about it situationally or community-wise. So one of the things maybe, I don't know if we have a little bit of space to do some personal interaction, maybe in the chat. I want people to maybe drop in the chat some of the challenges and obstacles that you've observed related to completing the census in your community. I don't think we'll have enough time to go over it here. As we go along, hopefully I can pick up some, but I really want folks to really distill that. So one of the things that I think maybe we can connect with Mary is that because of COVID, for example, she had to go home early, and as a result, she might have an issue completing the census because she's just not thinking about it, being back home, still dealing with school, and dealing with everything like that. So that's one that comes into mind. But I really think that it will be useful here for everyone to sort of maybe drop in the chat, drop in the Q&A, or maybe when we do start talking to one another, think about the challenges that you're experiencing, that you're seeing in your communities for the different personas that you come to mind. Great, someone just put a documented immigrants. So those who aren't as in the system, fear around that actually, and Julius brought up the census, the citizenship question, that actually was really something that a lot of folks we've heard from our colleagues is something that there's definitely an impact. And so how do you communicate the message that you should still fill out the census? It's actually really good for you to fill out the census, and you shouldn't be fearful that it'll harm your status in any way, shape, or form. Yes, general lack of interest and ambivalence. Patrons don't think that it's important. So this is great. And I actually want folks to really think about these challenge statements and combine that with some of the personas that you're thinking of in your communities. And again, be as detailed and drill down as much as possible to the real life situations, because those are the ideas that will really have an impact. So please keep them coming, and we'll definitely hopefully maybe address them as we go along as well. So next slide, please. So when you define the challenge, you really want to put it in a question form, and just sort of a little bit of semantics. So for example, we wanted to to spread it out a little bit, not just for Mary, but really just to think about you all as well. So the question for Mary, for example, is like, Mary, so how do we make sure that Mary Terrapin gets a reminder and knows that she has to fill out the census even though she had to go home because of COVID? In relation to maybe the challenges that some of you face as librarians, is how has COVID-19 impacted the operations of libraries, particularly in how you are planning to assist with the census? What can what do we do in terms from coming from the librarian perspective? What do we do and what can we do given the resources that we have? How can you leverage collaboration, potential collaborations with partners in your community, particularly in the ones that work with hard to count communities? And how might we improve response among hard to count populations in your communities, particularly the elderly, youth? One of the big things that we emphasize at the census is counting children under 5, those in need, non-native speakers. See, someone mentioned seniors in nursing homes. So what this activity does, again, is to really combine the persona and the challenge and really try to think through that. And in many ways, we want to maybe think of this as globally as possible. But again, sticking with Mary, so we know Mary, we know quite a bit about Mary, and we know the challenge with her is that she went back home. How do we make sure that she gets word out and she actually completes the census as well? So next slide, please. So what we actually do during the activity is to write as many concrete ideas or concepts as possible that address this particular challenge that you're facing, particularly in light of the persona that you're thinking of. So one, what we do is you usually have like a bunch of sticky notes or like a bunch of Post-it notes on a table, and we'd actually every to write down an idea on a Post-it note, and you'll see why in the next couple slides. But in this situation, maybe if you have a note stock open up on the side somewhere, or maybe even in the chat, particularly thinking about Mary, for example, what are some of the ideas that you might have to make sure that Mary completes the census now that she's away from home? I know some of your schools still have some form of connection to their students, particularly maybe whatever learning platform they might have. They might have text capabilities, email capabilities, other forms of outreach to students who aren't on campus anymore. Some of you already have very mature distance learning programs that you help or assist with. So in this instance, in many ways, write lists. I'd love for you guys on the list on the side to really write down ideas about how to really get Mary to make sure that she fills out the census given her situation that she's moving back home. Put that in the QA, put that in the chat. We'll go over them at the end of the activity if we have some time and go through that. So next slide, please. So what we'd ask you to do during the activity is to put up your sticky notes put up your sticky notes on a poster usually, and then actually sort of explain them. Why is this, where did this idea come from? How does this address the challenge and the persona at the same time? And the idea is to really share here. Part of the great thing about doing this activity is like the sharing, so to speak, so that you can get ideas from others. The whole point is to also like maybe collect ideas and put them into certain spaces, as you'll see in the next slides, and group them together, and then from that distill actionable ideas as well. So at this point, like you'd be posting them up on the wall. Next slide, please. You'll see what this looks like. You would actually, after we do this, you'd cluster them together around certain themes or common approaches, common tactics, or common subjects, things like that. And then in doing that, you'll actually get closer and closer to our idea. In fact, you might even have multiple ideas that fit under the same sort of umbrella to make that happen. So for example, like if a bunch of the ideas revolve around social media, you'll group it all under social media. If all your ideas involve some form of direct outreach, like mailers or something like that, it will be like something like that. If something's related to maybe some form of creation, so creating a video, creating social media content, I don't know, you would group it under that. So things like that would come up from time to time. Next slide, please. So this is what it actually looks like during activity. As you can see, some of the ideas would be maybe here in this particular one, it'd be like data related. Here, some of these are peer-to-peer. Some of these involve sharing resources. And so the great thing about this activity is that you will actually want to see and connect ideas. And sometimes you will actually use the different color Post-its to sort of to set up, to like put down the ideas, but sort of help you group them. So some of these are more subject oriented. Some of these are more dependent on the sort of action that's required. So these are some of the things that you'd work through, but the idea is again to sort of group these ideas into different groups so that you can be able to connect them in some way, shape, or form, so that you also can use those connections to sort of think of common ideas that you can all act upon in the same way, shape, or form as well. And so, as you can see off to the side, to the top left, you will also be able to sort of distill sort of themes from your different ideas. So, what is it? Expansion of resources. How we need better data for this particular situation. So, when I think in thinking about Mary, for example, just some themes, some general themes, is like getting out the word to somebody online. Social media, for example, might be another theme. Things like that. So one of the things. actually someone had a great idea. So you can still leverage leveraging library resources. The last question from Amy is like, how do we integrate the topic of census when helping Mary find books for a term paper? So still leveraging the library, because people still be interacting. I know you guys are still working, so people still are interacting with y'all. So if someone's actually coming to the library still, how do you make sure that Mary knows about the census while she's looking for a book and working during summer school, for example? Someone mentioned bloggers and youth influencers. So that would go over the social media. I would go into a social media group, so to speak. So, and then you'd be coming up with ideas or directly around social media, things like that. So I hope you guys have a good idea of how this sort of activity works as well. So we got I actually have two themes in my head right now. No, so one is actually the fact if your library is open and Mary happens to walk in or is looking for a book, picking up a book curbside or whatever, how do you make sure Mary, when she physically interacts with you, is reminded about the census? The other one is social media, online interaction. So how do we make sure, for example, that we speak to bloggers or youth influencers or things like that? How do we leverage social media to make sure that Mary knows about the census using, given our connections with a library? Someone mentioned military, so someone who knows quite a few people in the military. Those are actually they have unique forms of connecting, and actually oftentimes they're the ones who are engaged in sort of distance learning, for example, and online learning. So that if the military, a lot of the military folks in this area, that's actually a big way that they get ahead. So if your school provides those resources, how do you make sure that census messages get out there through any sort of online platforms you can have? So that's another theme. Maybe as well. So again, this is really how it generally looks when this activity is done in person, but you can definitely do this online, as you can see, particularly when you're having a fun and vibrant conversation like we're doing now. So next slide, please. So you group these further and further, and then try to distill the sort of the themes a bit more. Again, you want to make sure that you identify. Sometimes you can actually have the different post-its and the colors to really deal directly with different challenges. So oftentimes you might actually want to shape them depending on the challenge or depending on the persona as well. And so the idea is sometimes you don't want to be too specific sometimes in terms of like maybe having one idea hang out, because you do maybe want to have an idea sort of connect with one another. But as you can see, you definitely want to be as focused as possible when doing that as well. So next slide, please.
Hey, Noel.
Yes.
So we have a couple questions at the end of the slide that we want to get to. And I just got a message that we should probably try to touch on the questions because they will have access to this slide.
All right, perfect. All right, cool. Well, as you can see, the big thing here is you connect these, and one of the cooler parts of the activity is to take an idea and actually map it out. And so, for example, you would let's go with the social media. So now you know Mary wants to do, you want to interact with Mary's social media. So you will come up with different ideas related to social media that you make sure that Mary gets the word out. So one of the ideas that we have, for example, that we like to do is called virtual create-a-thons, where we use a similar process to create social media content. Another one is to maybe the library uses the social media avenues to make sure that there are reminders about the census, things like that. So these are the different ideas that can come about when you do this type of activity, this very focused sort of approach to doing things. Particularly, again, putting yourselves in, or creating a persona and putting yourself in their shoes, but also thinking about the challenges as they face the census. All these tools are available online. There'll be a website that's at the end of this slide also. But they're also available online. You can reach out to us and we can definitely walk you through this. I can walk you through this again. We can even do a mini version of it as well. Also, we can help I know I can still help facilitate. And so if you reach out to our colleagues here, they can maybe help you out as well. So I encourage you to visit our site here, download these tools, apply them in your communities. And I think you could definitely get a lot from this as well. Again, the idea is to put yourself in the shoes of the customers that you meet, the people that you're in your community, and figure out how you can make sure that you can come up with solutions to make sure that they respond to the census as well. So thank you, everyone. And I'll kick it over to Anna and our host here.
So much. Thank you for emphasizing several things. First of all, our ability and our privilege of serving as trusted messengers as librarians. And also, I love how you put it that we're pillars of communities. And especially in this environment where so many other institutions are kind of lacking or struggling, I should say, with credibility, like law enforcement, education, maybe faith-based organizations. And I think that libraries still have a lot of credibility in communities. So I think you really emphasize that. So we have one question that always comes up is, and you touched on this actually. So I'm going to actually go to the next question, and we will be expanding this session for another 10 minutes. If you're able to stay until 3:10, that would be lovely and great. But we understand if you have to drop off. This webinar is being recorded, so you can actually listen to the questions and answers afterwards. So have no fear, you will have access to this. And if you do have a question, please go ahead and post your question. So I'm going to go to the second one because you spoke very well about post-COVID-19 operations. You also talked a lot about, getting services from the Census Bureau. So another question is, once libraries reopen, can libraries request census tabulators to provide service during specific hours?
Yeah, this is a great question. The answer is we don't need to, right? Once libraries reopen, because we went online, if you have a computer in your library, that is the tabulator. What we can do, we can staff it with people who can educate. If there's any concerns about the form, take 10 minutes to complete the census. I know in Maryland, the Maryland Library Association, we trained some librarians and they designated like 1 or 2 computers that are just a census computer. So when the community comes in, they just use that computer. We will have people in the field and mobile questionnaire assistance centers, and some of those could be in the library. So if you guys want to learn more about how you can make a library mobile questionnaire assistance center, that's something that we can discuss.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Another question is, I know a lot of the outreach is specific to public libraries, but what about K-12 librarians? What can K-12 librarians do to engage children and teens? And you spoke a little bit about college campuses, but how can university librarians help to get a complete count of college students?
Absolutely, and my colleagues, y'all feel free to chime in. But no, so with this one, we have this thing called a Statistics in Schools initiative, where we created outreach materials specific to educators in the K through 12. So we have not only a census coloring book, we have a census song, we have curriculums, right? Math, geography, and the idea there is if you're gonna be in the K through 12, you don't need to deviate from the curriculum. And I'm a former educator, so I would say don't deviate from the curriculum, but make the curriculum connect to the census. And so we have, and I'll put that link as well. That's what we encourage the librarians to do because there's fun activities they can use. And Robin, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so I have been in the chat trying to answer questions as much as possible. And so when it comes to since we're talking about schools and students, one of the questions that was said was, is there a concern that college students will potentially be counted twice? Once if they will be out there on their own, fill out their own form, or the second time if their parents count them on their form. So I kind of wanted to know if you can kind of touch up on how the group quarter operations is, just ensuring that we don't necessarily count people twice. We do have a separate department that actually does it's called like a duplication center that takes care of individuals. But I kind of wanted to know if you can expand on that, Julius, please.
Absolutely. So we tell people it's a population count, but it's a head count. So wherever you are, majority of the time of the year is where you get counted. Where that gets tricky is right now college students went home. So majority of the time of the year, they did go home. And so college students don't fill out the census. And I remember 10 years ago when I was a young whippersnapper. But the idea is they don't fill it out because they assume their parents are doing it. What we tell people is fill it out and we'll make sense of it, right? An overcount is better than an undercount. So if you're a college student, you're not sure if your parents put you on the census, fill it out. Parents, if you're not sure if your student filled it out, call them and say, hey, child of mine who's now living in my house. Although you're here, if you're supposed to be on campus, you should fill it out on campus. You should fill out off campus. So parents have to now advocate for both because the reality is when your child is away on campus and they're living on campus, they should get the resources there, right? And that looks like hospitals, And the way I appeal to college students, I say the census data determines things like if the Chipotle is coming to your town, right? And so if you get counted at your mom's place and everybody's there, businesses base their decisions on census data. So where you get counted matters, and it matters for 10 years. So to answer to Robin's question, fill it out if you're in doubt. College students should be filled out way they were supposed to, including off-campus residents and parents. The census is not taxes, and there's a difference there. So if they lived in your house majority of the time of the year, and that includes children as early as 0, if they were born before April 1st.
Yes, and just quickly to address the question about reaching college students, if you as librarians know exactly where students gather physically or even online, take that message directly there. So if you know that there's a form, some direct way, that's probably the most direct way of making sure that your students at universities make sure that they get the word about the census. So there you go.
And then I did also want to add to that, while you fill out the actual questionnaire from the census, they ask how many people actually live in your household. But the other question that they ask is, do they live there most of the year, or do they live there part of the year? And you're able to answer, well, you know, for example, Johnny goes to, I don't know, Colorado State. So he's there. So that is also part of the duplication that they're going to assist in. The other question that I also did see, which was a great question, was how can we get teens involved in aiding their parents to complete the census? Again, just coming from a first generation family, a lot of anytime there was any type of government paperwork of any type of sort, our parents would designate us as translators. So the one thing that, you know, teenagers can do is they can be translators, right? If they live in a household that speaks multiple languages, or if English is not the first language. That's one thing. Another thing that a lot of schools have done, teenagers, or most people, but I'm going to stick with the teens, do like some sort of incentives, right? So if you say, hey, we're going to do a census volunteer, whatever you want to call it, if you guys come, you'll get, you know, a $5 or $10 gift card to Starbucks. You guys know the teens in your areas a lot more than we do. And I know my kids, they're in the close to preteen, so electronics are like their thing, or even sports are their thing. So anything that is around them that kind of will get their attention would be helpful. And knowing that we're home now, right? So the one thing that we can say is that we've been around our children a whole lot more than we would have thought. So what an opportunity for us to come together as a family and say, hey, you know, this is really important. As a kid, you learn about statistics. This is why you're in the class that you're in. This is why you're able to receive the services, meal services, because of the census. So I think this is such a great opportunity for families to talk together and to discuss this.
And Robin, about the teens, I know one of the creative things that we saw in one of the counties, the school districts gave extra credit when the children went home and pitched the census to their parents. And then the parents had to sign that this child gave a presentation. And I like that because not only does it put the children or the young teens in a position where they own the information, but it's also public speaking. It's also convincing. And I've learned that children are the most convincing outreach campaign you can ever have. And to Robin's point, we want them to make it go viral, right? Like, I don't know what that means. I'm an old man myself. But if it goes viral and it's relevant to them on their platforms, they might actually start paying attention. So yeah, so thank you for that.
And this is the contact information for our colleagues. And then you can connect with us here. But I did want to leave, I said we can go to about 3:10 if anyone can stay on. If not, we understand. If anyone had any other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can post it in the chat box. This has been a wonderfully informative presentation. Thank you. We do have one question. Let's see.
And so yeah, we'll be here because this was awesome. And for the record, Noel did that presentation. It's a 3-hour presentation, and he did it in like 15 minutes. So shout out to him.
Yes, thank you, Noel.
No problem. No, it's much more fun when you have a bit of time, and actually, hopefully, when you can all do it in person again. So yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for having us.
it's always great when we have ready to use tools and programs. A lot of times it's the low hanging fruit that makes the most impact. So thank you for modeling that event. What was it called again? The Census Solutions event.
Workshop or event. But one thing actually I do want another cool event. I mentioned it as sometimes it comes up as a solution is something called the Virtual Creatorthon. Julius was actually a participant in the Higher Ed Summit, the Maryland Higher Ed Summit a couple of weeks ago. And what that is and you can actually do it virtually as well, is you basically have a similar sort of design approach where you walk people through the idea of creating a persona, but instead of coming up with specific solutions to get that person to complete the census, you actually come up with social media content or like memes, essentially memes or posters or things like that that speak directly to the persona that you created. It's fun in person, and we've actually adapted it so you can actually do it virtually as well. And so it's actually quite fun, and it's been successfully implemented in many places so far virtually. So and it's a cool way, because the aim is like not only do you create that content right then and there, but you encourage folks to post it on their social media outlets as well. So and I think libraries, you guys being the center of lots of things in your communities, actually have a great chance to for that particular activity to get folks to participate and do things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. We do have two questions. I am not able to see them for some reason. James, do you mind copying them into the chat box? And this will allow us to close out these two questions.
So I think the first one.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. So we're gonna. Do you put them in the chat?
So the two questions: can you add? You talk about how can we utilize BCALA social media as an outreach tool for this great information?
We can actually. The marketing and PR committee is the one that's in charge of all of BCALA social media, and so that's actually something that is very practical that we can do. Thanks for thinking of that. I don't think that we had, right, James?
Right. No.
So we can do that, absolutely.
And if I may, on our outreach materials, all our materials are not only targeted to different communities, you can add to them. So our outreach material, if you want to add the logo, take away our logo, it's actually really well done. And even our videos, our YouTube videos are also targeted not only to look like the community, but also in language. And I forgot to mention that you can now also fill out the language online with up to 52 languages. So our language materials, our outreach materials, you can all brand with BCALA.
Thank you so much. And the last question, do you mind sharing that one, James?
I think the last one was asked about the K-6 resources. Okay. I think he answered that one. So I think people are looking for the resources, I guess, depending on the age of the audience.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much. If you have any other questions, you can contact our colleagues at these email addresses, and feel free to also email us at BCALA or connect with us on social media. Thank you for attending today's session, and we have another one next week, so please do register. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Julius, Robin, and Noel for their amazing, amazing information. You've been incredible. Thank you for partnering with us at BCALA.
Love librarians.
Yes, go librarians.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
And
Bye,
thank you for the
everyone.
opportunity on behalf of the Census Bureau, the regional director. This is awesome. We love what you guys are doing. Thank you so much. Go Maryland.
Go Terps.
James, do you want to stop broadcasting now? Maybe? I don't know how to do that. I'm used to WebEx, not Zoom. So I can stop sharing. That's the first thing. I know how to do that. But yeah, so I just wanted to thank you all once again. And what I'll do is, if there